Dak Prescott says that he is in the best shape of his career. What does that mean for his dynasty value? We'll tell you next.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys. Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. What? We're just talking about the Cowboys today. Don't worry. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Moser. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Moser. You can also listen to me on the Locked On Cowboys podcast, where I talk about the Cowboys every single day over there, not just one day a week. And joining me today, as always, is Michael Fabiano. You can follow him on Twitter at Michael_Fabiano. And yes, today we're going to talk about the Dallas Cowboys. Just a little show note. We're going to be discussing some divisions over the next 2 weeks. We're going to go division by division, telling you some players that we're buying, selling, and holding. So be on the lookout for that starting next Monday. But on today's show, Fabs, we're going to talk only about the Dallas Cowboys because there's a lot of Cowboys news out there. And let's start with Dak Prescott, who says he's in phenomenal shape, the best shape of his life, going into training camp. He's recovered from his hamstring injury. What does that mean for his dynasty outlook?
So first, we know that he's entering his age 32 season, so he's not a spring chicken, but also quarterbacks can play into their mid to late 30s in some cases. I think he is a bargain at this point. And in redrafts, he's a major bargain. In terms of ADP for Dynasty, is at 143.2. So he's the QB 18. And here's why I think he's going to be a bargain. When Dak Prescott has had two high-end receivers at his disposal, his numbers have been phenomenal. Okay. And I'm going to go back and go right through all of these sort of scenarios. Like when you go back and look at what Dak did in 2019, when he had Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup was not a high-end receiver, but he had a good year. He had over 1,100 yards. He scored over 200 fantasy points. Dak Prescott was the QB threw for 4,900 yards, 30 touchdowns. Now, he was also helped by the fact that he rushed for 277 yards and 3 touchdowns. Coming off of lower body injuries, which, he had the gruesome ankle injury a few years ago, and then the hamstring. I don't think Dak's going to run as much. No. But I don't think that's also something that's going to be a death nail. Let's put it that way. Going back to the original point, 2020, Amari Cooper, 285 fantasy points, over 1,300 yards. CeeDee Lamb, and we're talking about the pace that these players were on because remember, Dak was hurt after 5 games. CeeDee Lamb was on pace for 1,300 yards and 270 fantasy points. Marcus, do you remember the pace that Dak was on that season? He was on pace to throw for, and it would have never happened. He was on pace to throw for like 6,000 yards. It was insane.
Mike Nolan. Mike Nolan's defense was awful. Yeah.
Crazy. So again, that's not going to happen, but he had it in him as recently as a few years back. And then in 2021, full season, he had CeeDee and he had Amari Cooper. CeeDee had 1,100 yards and 6 touchdowns and over 230 fantasy points. Amari Cooper had 8 touchdowns and over 200 fantasy points, and Dak was the QB7. He threw for over 4,400 yards and 37 touchdowns. And that year, he only rushed for 146 yards and 1 score, and he ended up being the QB7. Back to the rushing situation. Last year, before he got hurt, he was on pace for just 28 carries and 115 yards. That would have been 27 fewer carries and 127 fewer yards than he had the previous year. Dak's not going to run the ball that much anymore, folks. You remember in the first 3 years of his career, he rushed for 6 touchdowns every single year. And he was very good. I mean, he's rushed for a combined 11 touchdowns since 2019. So that's not going to happen. But the situation that the Cowboys are in right now, with 2 very good, CeeDee's elite and Pickens is damn talented, 2 really good wide receivers, a very good tight end in Jake Ferguson, a crappy backfield, and a defense that's questionable, Marcus, at best. This is all in the mix. It's we're kind of stirring the pot here of all the things and all the ingredients that you need for a quarterback to have a good year. And also, let's keep in mind, as much as I hate loathe, despise Brian Schottenheimer being the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, it's probably a good thing for Dak. Because part of the reason why Jerry Jones in his infinite wisdom decided that he was going to keep Schottenheimer around and make him the head coach is because of the relationship he had with Dak Prescott. The Cowboys also have a bad schedule. They're going to be playing from behind. They're going to have to throw the football. Like, everything points to Dak having a really good season.
Let's also not forget that when Brian Schottenheimer was the offensive coordinator with Seattle, he wanted to let Russ cook, right? And that's the biggest reason why Seattle moved on from Schottenheimer, is because Pete Carroll wanted to keep Russell Wilson as more as a game manager, and Schottenheimer wanted to let Russ cook. And if you remember those years when Schottenheimer was calling some of the plays, Russell Wilson was putting up monster numbers.
Really good numbers, yep.
Huge numbers in Seattle. I would assume they're going to let Dak. This is going to be Dak's offense, so he's going to control it. They're going to throw the ball a bunch. But one of the reasons why I like Dak as a bargain in dynasty leagues is because I don't think the price can go any lower. You look at some of the quarterbacks that are being drafted behind him, like Justin Fields, who was benched last year for Russell Wilson, Bryce Young, who was benched last year for Andy Dalton, Matt Stafford, who's 37 years old, Anthony Richardson, who was benched for Joe Flacco, Tua, who can't stay on the field. Like, Dak Prescott is guaranteed to be the Cowboys starter for the next 3 years. There's just not very many quarterbacks in the league that are guaranteed to be on the field, every week, assuming they're healthy, like Dak is, because of the contract. And this is where I always talk about with Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes might not have the ceiling of a Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, but he's going to be ranked high every single year because he's going to be a starting quarterback in the NFL for the next 10 years. And there's a lot of value in that. For Dak, knowing that he's going to be on the field with CeeDee Lamb, with what you would think is an improved offensive line after the Cowboys have spent 3 first-round picks on the offensive line over the last 4 years.
A lot of Tylers.
Tyler Smith, Tyler Guyton, Tyler Booker. I can't envision the scenario where Dak's ADP really drops unless he suffers another season-ending injury. I think now is a good time to buy Dak.
And clearly, I mean, a lot of this stuff is much more attractive when you're talking about redrafts because he is going to be 32 during the course of this upcoming season. But again, still, I mean, he could still have, 3-4 good years in him. And if for no other reason is that he's going to have CeeDee Lamb, we don't know what's going to happen with George Pickens after the season. Really, he's on a move deal. Hopefully, he'll have a big season, and maybe the Cowboys decide to keep him, franchise him, whatever the case may be. Although they got to deal with Micah as well. But the bottom line is that the Cowboys offense is almost always one of the premier offenses in the National Football League. And they do not have a running game. Don't give me, we'll talk about that. Don't give me Javonte Williams.
Yeah, hold on that. We're
not talking about that yet, but they're going to throw the ball. They're going to throw the football. And so that's good news for Dak Prescott. And it's good news for dynasty managers who are able to get him late, because there's a world where maybe JJ McCarthy is a guy that you really like, but you don't feel comfortable starting him on a week-to-week basis just yet. I mean, Dak Prescott's a guy you can get much later and, put him in there, put me in, coach, and get him a bunch of starts. And I think he'll put up very good numbers.
Yeah. Again, I don't think that Dak fantasy ceiling is as high as it was a couple years ago, because I just don't see the rushing yards. Like, I think as he gets older, we're going to see fewer and fewer carries. I do think he can give you 3 or 4 rushing touchdowns every year because he's still a big body, but we're not going to see the early career numbers where he's getting 400 rushing yards every season. Go ahead.
But he did prove with that big season that I had alluded to that he didn't have to have big rushing totals to still finish in the top 7 or 8 at the quarterback position. And that's his ceiling. Like, the QB2 seasons are over. He had 1 and it was nice. It was memorable. Cowboys didn't win, Jack, but he helped you win a fantasy championship, or at least get there. His ceiling now is that of a, QB7, QB8, somewhere in that. I can see Dak throwing for 4,300 yards, 30 plus touchdowns, 12 interceptions, maybe giving you 150 rushing yards and maybe a touchdown or 2. And that's still going to be good enough to be a relatively productive starter in fantasy leagues.
So, last thing before we move on, if you look at Dak's numbers since the Cowboys drafted CeeDee Lamb in 2020, and if you extrapolate them out to 17 games, You're looking at somebody who is throwing for 4,600 yards a season, 34 touchdowns, about 270 yards per game, and then also giving you about 200 rushing yards a season. Even if he declines, let's say it's not 4,600, let's say it's 4,200, and let's say it's 30 touchdowns versus 34 touchdowns, you're still talking about a QB1 for fantasy. And that's why we're so in on Dak, because he's going to be there for the long-term future, because the Cowboys gave him a big deal that's finally kicking in now. This is year one of his new contract. And because when CeeDee has been on the field, they've been incredible together. So Dak Prescott, still a value in your dynasty leagues. What about the running backs? Will any running back in Dallas be a value this year? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Listen, I know that the NFL is right around the corner, but we still have some summer sports that are in full swing. And whether you're about baseball under the lights or golf on the green or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it just a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and always so many different fun ways to bet. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. New customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are discussing the Dallas Cowboys going into the 2025 season and beyond. And let's talk about the running back situation, because I'm gonna give you the floor. What are your thoughts of the Cowboys running back room from a dynasty perspective?
It sucks. It sucks from a redraft perspective. It sucks from a reality perspective. You've got three guys in there, one of which obviously is Jaden Blue, and he'll likely be more popular, certainly, than Miles Sanders in Dynasty. Right now, his ADP is at 141.8. He's behind Javonte Williams, who's only 25 years old. Javonte's at 129.7. Javonte Williams was never really able to be what we thought he was going to be in Denver. And then he got hurt. And since then, it was downhill, and they went in and completely reconstructed their backfield because Javonte just wasn't that dude. Miles Sanders, I mean, I've talked about it before. I'll say it again. I just don't think he's a great running back. He benefited from the Eagles' offense, the offensive line, when he was good. He went to Carolina. They gave him $6 million a year. And what did they do? They ended up basically kicking him to the curb and giving Chuba Hubbard a big deal, and then drafting Jonathan Brooks, who was coming off an ACL. So Sanders, his fall from grace was very swift. Let's put it that way. Now, in terms of Jaden Blue, I mean, the youth is what you like, but he's had fumbling problems in the past. He's only 5'9". He's like 196 pounds. He played behind Bijan and Brooks and Trey Wisner at Texas. And Marcus compares him to Lance Dunbar. I mean, that's all you need to know. Lance Dunbar was not a great fantasy player. I don't think that the future running back of the Dallas Cowboys is on the roster right now. They're going to have to do something. I thought they should have done something 2 years ago. They did not. Don't get me started on the Jerry Jones stuff. But their future RB1, Marcus, I don't think it's on the roster right now. I just don't see any one of these three guys making any kind of consistent, productive impact in fantasy.
Probably not. And I've been pretty adamant that I think they're
You so want to be positive about this. I can tell.
No, I don't. Well, here's the thing. I know that Cowboy fans, or not even just Cowboy fans, that the national media is upset that they did not re-sign Rico Dowdle. And I get it. I was a fan of Rico Dowdle. But let's think about what we were talking about last year at this exact same time with Rico Dowdle. We were saying that the Cowboys running back situation sucked, and they had washed up Zeke Elliott, and they signed Dalvin Cook, and it's going to be awful. It's going to be terrible. Rico Dowdle had, in his first 4 years of his career, 385 total yards. That's it. That's all he had. And then once he took over as a starter, I think in week 7, he averaged 95 total yards per game, which is unbelievable. Now, he didn't score the touchdowns, and a lot of that's because Dak Prescott wasn't on the field and the offense was bad. But I think that kind of shows, like, if you have a decent offensive line, you're going to get production, because I don't think anybody thought Rico Dowdle was even a rosterable NFL running back, because he showed nothing in the first 4 years of his career.
All right, but I'll push back on you. Who was the quarterback for most of the games he played?
Cooper Rush.
There was no Dak. So
I know, but
that completely changed the way the offense had to run, and they had it. I mean, they didn't. Their wide receiver depth was awful.
But he was super efficient, though. I think that's
no,
the thing.
I'm not saying that he wasn't good. I'm not saying that he wasn't good, but I just feel like they maybe utilized him a little bit more than they would have if they had a Dak Prescott, if they had a George Pickens in the pass attack. And I think Rico's better than what they have right now. And so
I don't disagree, but I don't think the gap between Rico Dowdle and who they have on the roster is that significant. And we were starting Rico Dowdle as RB2 every single game in the second half of the year.
Again, first of all, I just do not like Miles Sanders as a football player. I'm sure he's a wonderful human being. I don't think Jaden Blue has got what it takes to be a featured back in the NFL. The Cowboys hope he could be, a satellite back kind of home run hitter type. And it's like, I've been burned by Javonte Williams too many times. I'm just not going back. I'm not going back there.
I completely understand. Like Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders don't do anything for me either. Like, so I'm with you. At the same time, we know that this backfield has been productive with whoever's been back there over the last couple of years. And these running backs are incredibly cheap. You can get Miles Sanders at RB 84 in Dynasty leagues right now, which means that he's probably on your waiver wire. You pick him up, and if he's not starting or playing, you drop him in. It's no harm, no foul. I think from a long-term perspective, they are going to get a running back, whether it's a trade this year. We talked about maybe Ken Walker on Wednesday's Locked on Dynasty. I think someone like Dameon Pierce is an option as well. But I think they're probably going to draft somebody early-ish next year, not in the first round, but probably somewhere, day 2, day 3, early day 3. I just think this is a backfield that you're just renting these guys for a year and kind of seeing what happens. And I'm okay with that. Like, you can stash Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders on your roster, and it's going to cost you absolutely nothing.
The ADP data is attractive. And so at that point in drafts, you're throwing darts to some degree. So is it worth throwing a dart on a Williams or a Blue or a Sanders at their current level? Yeah. I mean,
I wouldn't. Jaden Blue is RB 45. I would not pay that price.
Too high. Okay. So then Marcus is out on Jaden Blue, and I don't think he's going to be a future back in the NFL. So basically what you're doing is hoping, because Javonte Williams will maybe not be on the Cowboys next season. I would guess he probably wouldn't be.
I would be shocked.
Miles Sanders is probably not going to be on the Cowboys next season.
I'd be shocked.
So we have no clue what these guys are going to do or where they're going to be in 2026. So that's why I'm saying, and even for this season, if Javonte Williams rushes for 900 yards and 7 touchdowns, I think that's a win. Yeah. But in fantasy, that's kind of like, it's okay. I mean, it's all right.
But it's all about your expectations, though, because you're not
right. But based on when you're getting them. Based on where you're getting him, then I can understand, the desire to go. I'm not saying I wouldn't go out and grab him, but he's going to be like my RB5.
Sure.
Maybe Javonte would be more of a low 4 type, but I just don't have high expectations.
Let me ask you this, because I'm with you. Do you think the Cowboys' run game, not their running backs, but their run game will be bad this year?
I think it will be. I think it will be among the worst in the NFL, to be quite honest with you.
Okay. See, I don't. I think it's going to be much closer to league average. I don't think they have a running back on their roster that's going to add value to the unit. But when you have CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens and Dak Prescott and all this money and picks invested in your offensive line, I do think they're going to be in a lot of shootouts, and that's just going to lead to a lot of fantasy points and a lot of rushing yards. I don't think this is going to be a bad run game at all. I think it was bad last year at the first 5 weeks of the year because they were playing a running back that didn't deserve to be in the NFL anymore, and Ezekiel Elliott. Like, he was so beyond washed. I think Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders are pretty washed. I don't think they're as washed as Zeke was. Like, Zeke was. All right, no other team in the NFL would have had Zeke on the roster.
Give me your ceiling based on just RB rank where they would finish for Javonte Williams? Like in the best case scenario, is Javonte Williams an RB3? Is he a flex starter that you're playing every single week? Is that the ceiling for Javonte?
I think he could be a very low end RB2, high end RB3.
What?
But actually, to be honest with you, let me rephrase that. I don't think Javonte can do that. I think Miles Sanders. If there's going to be one guy
that's worse.
No, well,
Can't stand it.
I think Sanders is the guy that has the higher ceiling. I think you're right. If Javonte is the running back, you're probably counting a lot on touchdowns, right? He's probably going to need double-digit touchdowns to do that. I think Sanders is the one guy that, from everything we've heard out of Cowboys camp, has been the more impressive running back. He's got more juice. He looks refreshed. And again, I know how bad Miles Sanders was in Carolina. I think he's the potential to be the guy that is a low-end RB2 that you never feel great about.
Wow. I'll tell you this. If that happens, I will absolutely take you out for a steak dinner. If Miles Sanders ends up as one of the top 24 running backs in fantasy football this season, I will 100% take you out for a steak dinner when I see you after the season, because I don't think there's a chance in hell that he does that.
But last thing before we move on, I've been pretty adamant that I don't think they're leading rushers on the roster. I think what the plan has always been is that Jaden Blue is somebody that's going to be, you're going to sprinkle him in a little bit, and they're just trying to figure out between Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders who can be the backup to whoever they trade for, whether that is Dameon Pierce or whether that's Kenneth Walker, or maybe it's somebody not as exciting. Maybe it's, Zamir White from the Raiders, who's blocked a little bit. I know none of those guys are all that exciting, but I do think they provide upgrades on Javonte, and it's just not going to cost them anything to go out and get them.
At least you didn't say Sincere McCormick.
I kind of like Sincere McCormick a little bit. That's a different show. All right, let's talk about CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, the new wide receiver duo in Dallas. What do their fantasy outlooks look like for 2025 and beyond? We will get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show. As training camps get closer and moves are being made, hosts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Fabs, let's talk about the receivers. CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens. What's the outlook not only for this year, but beyond in Dallas?
I mean, there's no reason to think that CeeDee Lamb won't continue to put up elite numbers. I don't know if he's going over 400 fantasy points, which he did, a couple of years ago when he was, the top dog. But I mean, you're talking about a guy who's going to, catch 90 plus passes and go over 1,300 receiving yards and give you somewhere in the neighborhood of double-digit touchdowns, especially again in a Cowboys offense that should be throwing the ball. You like them to be in a lot of shootouts this season. I agree. I don't know what their defense is going to look like. And they do have a very difficult schedule. So CeeDee Lamb, it's sort of like, it's just, what you're going to get from him. I mean, he's a stud. With George Pickens, I think his ceiling is probably 70 catches, maybe 1,000 yards, 1,100 yards, and like 5 to 7 touchdowns. So I think he could be valuable from a fantasy perspective, more of a flex starter in that sort of range, because we've seen these Cowboy offenses in the recent past, and I threw out a bunch of them earlier in the show, 2019, 2020, 2021, when Dak has had two really good, talented wide receivers on the roster, they have been able to make beautiful fantasy music together. And one of those was Michael Gallup, who had over 200 fantasy points in 2019. And listen, George Pickens is Miles Sanders, better than Michael Gallup. So I think there's room for both of these guys, and CeeDee obviously to put up elite numbers, but for Pickens to put up really good numbers. I can also see Jake Ferguson putting up, a very good season where he's in the 60 catch range with around 700 yards and 6 to 7 touchdowns. I think the pass catchers in this offense have the potential to be very, very good. George Pickens is not going to be an elite guy, not behind CeeDee Lamb. Long term, we don't really know what we're going to see with him. Does he stay with the Cowboys? Would they franchise him? What's going on with Micah? Can they even franchise him? If Pickens decides that he wants to maybe move on, they can't give George Pickens a whole boatload of money, which I'm sure he's going to want because Jerry's a mess with the salary cap. But Pickens could end up putting up such good numbers this year, playing well, not being a locker room distraction, where he ends up going someplace where he becomes the alpha.
And I think Dallas would love that, by the way. Like, that would be the best case scenario. Like, hey, come in, play awesome, leave for a 3rd round comp pick. Great. We're good with that.
Right, exactly. And you would love that in Dynasty too, because all of a sudden, like, he had a good year in 2020, this season in 2029, and then all of a sudden, boom, this guy earns an alpha role someplace around the National Football League. So that's certainly the best case scenario. But I think both guys will be very productive, and of course, CeeDee Lamb will be uber productive.
Yeah, let's start with CeeDee. He's the one player that I don't worry about at all. You look at his history with Dak, and we've got 5 years of them together now.
Mm-hmm.
CeeDee Lamb is averaging 90 yards per game with Dak Prescott over his career. You extrapolate that to a 17-game schedule, you're looking at about 1,500 yards. And by the way, he's averaging over about a half touchdown per game. That's right into the wide receiver one, like overall wide receiver one range. So I don't think no matter what happens, he's going to get his targets. He's going to get his catches. I think with the addition of George Pickens, all that means is CeeDee Lamb is just going to get more slot snaps, which is great for his dynasty value. So nothing changes there. And I think he's more firmly in that range of wide receiver 3. Maybe you move him down to wide receiver 4 because of Malik Neighbors, but he's in there. Pickens is a little harder to figure out because I could see a situation where he puts up like Jordan Addison numbers where it's like 1,000 yards and double-digit touchdowns because he's just getting all these one-on-one opportunities. I could also see a situation where maybe he's not getting that many targets and maybe he's only getting 6 targets a game and it's more like 800 yards and 8 touchdowns because Ferguson's getting some, Jalen Tolbert's getting about 500, 600 yards a season. He's the one that I'm probably staying away from in Dynasty, despite the upgrade at quarterback. But I do think the range of outcomes is just much, much higher than it ever was before.
Yeah. Again, I think the ceiling, assuming that CeeDee stays healthy for the entire season, in terms of Pickens, is probably right around 70 catches, right around 1,000, 1,100 yards, somewhere in the 5 to 7 touchdown range. And I think that's gonna give you over 200 fantasy points, which is completely fine. There is the specter of the unknown. George Pickens has had a reputation of maybe not being the best dude in the locker room. Maybe that'll change in Dallas. Maybe it won't. We're gonna find out. But I think the pie in the sky scenario, as we talked about, maybe for Cowboys fans, the Cowboys themselves, and Dynasty leaguers, is he goes out there, he has a really good season, and he cashes in on it. And he ends up getting an alpha role someplace else around the league because he's scheduled to be a free agent in 2026.
And the thing with Pickens now is I think the price is way more attainable than it was a year ago when he was being drafted as like a top 20 dynasty receiver. He's wide receiver 32 right now. And the names behind him are like Tyreek Hill, who's 31 and has injury concerns and off the field concerns. Mike Evans, who's 31. Chris Godwin, who's in an offense with Mike Evans coming off a major injury. Brandon Ayuk, who's in an offense with a lot of pass catchers coming off a major injury. So he's in that range of receivers that all are very talented, but all have at least one big concern. I think wide receiver 32 is fine with me. That's about where I would slot him. And if you want somebody that has a high ceiling, I think George Pickens can do it, because imagine a scenario where CeeDee rolls his ankle and is out for 3 weeks. Nothing serious, but he just misses a couple games. Where are we ranking George Pickens every single week in redraft leagues? Or
he's going to be overall. He's going to be in the top 15 every single week. No question.
Exactly. Yeah.
No question.
So we think this Cowboys offense is going to be really good. Fabs isn't quite as sold in the run
passing game. You and I differ on the run game. The passing game, I think, will be fine.
I wouldn't be surprised if the run game is good, but none of the running backs are super valuable for fantasy, right? Like maybe it's more of a
combined sort of scenario. Sure. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think an example could be like what we saw in Washington last year, where you have Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler. And yeah, both those guys were productive, and the Washington run game was good, but you didn't feel great about ever starting them. That's kind of how I envision.
I'll tell you right now, I'd rather have Brian Robinson and Eck than I would the 3 guys the Cowboys have right now.
I don't necessarily disagree. All right, that is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football, not Locked On Cowboys, but Locked On Dynasty, your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. On Friday's show, we're going to tell you 6 sleepers that you need to target in every single Dynasty League. So be on the lookout for that. Make sure you're following Fabs on Twitter at Michael_Fabiano. I'm at Marcus_Moser, and we will see you right back here on Friday.